We all heard the saying that all lives really matter in America, but is that really the case? Do all lives really matter? For example, when it comes to white women going missing, law enforcement puts more time, effort, and priority to look into them. But when it comes to black and Native American indigenous women, law enforcement do not put more time, effort, or priority in looking into them. According to National Crime Information Center, nearly two-thirds of 300,000 women that goes missing are black. So much Native American women goes missing that there's not accurate number to estimate how much of them goes missing. If you haven't seen True Action Crime, Missing and Murdered in Montana, I suggest you go see it. There are two videos that I'd like you to watch. Both of them is from Al Jazeera, talking about black women goes missing and talking about Native American indigenous women goes missing. Hopefully, after watching these two videos, your perception and opinions of things will change. Also, they have advertisement in between the two videos.
In 2017, 32-year-old Olivia Lone Bear, an indigenous mother of 5 from North Dakota, went missing. Her family searched for her for months and pushed law enforcement to take the case more seriously. 9 months later, a volunteer community member found her body in a pickup truck, submerged in a lake within a mile of her home. This is just one case out of thousands of Native American women who go missing and are later found dead. In the United States, indigenous women and girls are disappearing and being murdered at alarming rates compared to other women, in what's often called an epidemic of violence. Joining us to discuss this are Mary Catherine Nagel, a citizen of Cherokee Nation and lawyer focused on tribal sovereignty and safety for Native women and children. Carrie Colfer, member of the Tlingit Tribe of Southeast Alaska and National Indigenous Women's Resource Center's Senior Native Affairs Advisor. Thank you both for joining me on Upfront. Mary Catherine, in recent years, thousands of Native American women have been reported missing. Law enforcement is often slow to react, and families are often left waiting months for answers, and they're often dismissed and told that going missing isn't a crime. What's at the root of this crisis?
You know, such an important question, and I think we have to understand that this crisis is both cultural and legal in nature. I say cultural because violence against Native women is a practice that began with the colonial conquest of the United States. I mean, all you have to do is read Christopher Columbus's journals to understand that this is a man who literally bragged about raping and murdering indigenous women when he got lost and washed up on the shoreline over here. So you've got that, you've got the history of the U.S. military using rape and homicide against Native women as a military tactic to conquer tribal nations. We don't talk about that history. It's not a mystery as to why there's a high rate of violence against our Native women today. At the same time, we have a legal framework that allows that violence to continue. In 1978, the United States Supreme Court in Oliphant versus Suquamish Indian Tribe eliminated tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians who come onto tribal lands and commit crimes. So today, non-Indians can walk onto a reservation or onto Indian lands and murder a Native woman with no consequences, and they do. The Supreme Court has taken that jurisdiction away.
Well, and I want to unpack the legal part of that in just a sec. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around, though, this idea that when a crime is committed or when someone is just reported missing, Carrie, that the response is indifference or, it's not a crime to go missing. They get dismissed. I mean, why is that?
I think in part Native women are really underrepresented in data. And so we know that the statistics of missing or murdered Indigenous women are extremely high, but we know that they're actually likely a lot higher. And so all of these historical factors, in addition to these jurisdictional barriers, and the failure of the federal government to adequately fund justice and victim service systems in Indian country has led to predators knowing that they can target Native women without repercussions, and no one's really going to care because the mainstream media doesn't really cover it very often.
Well, Mary Catherine, I mean, you're one of the people who said that we have a culture that promotes and celebrates violence against Native women. The data seems to bear that out. Native American women are 2.5 more likely to be raped compared to all other races. And in some reservations, murder rates of Native American women are up to 10 times higher than the national average for all races. Can you speak to this dynamic?
Yeah, in terms of culture, up until this last summer, Native women's bodies were still used to sell butter and other commercial products. That is starting to change. Land O'Lakes just changed their label, but many Americans still think that it's completely appropriate to dress up as Pocahontas for Halloween. Pocahontas was a child victim of rape, kidnapping, and homicide. She was an indigenous girl, a little girl who lost her life to violence, to sexual violence. And she's not a Halloween costume. But so long as our real women who are murdered and raped are just treated as Halloween costumes, it creates a culture that just honestly accepts this violence, so that when a Native woman is raped or goes missing or is murdered, I think because we have been dehumanized and over-sexualized, it's harder for Americans at large to have that kind of emotional response of, we need to find her life matters when a Native woman goes missing.
Carrie, this pop culture piece is interesting to me. How much of it is the kind of indifference to the lives and the well-being of Native women, and how much of it is an ignorance of history?
I think it's a combination of all of it. I think it's a lack of understanding about our history. I think most of the time in history class, Natives make up like the first chapter, despite the fact that we've been here for all of American history and centuries, thousands of years prior to that. And then I think there is also willful ignorance. I think these issues often feel very far away to other non-Native people who don't live on or near tribal lands. And so they can sort of ignore all of these issues that Native women face, and they never really have to deal with it or think about it. And frankly, they don't want to.
Carrie, let me ask you another question, because we started to talk about this idea of non-Native perpetrators of violence. 96% of the time, violence against Indigenous women is from a non-Native perpetrator. Tribal courts, tribal police, for the most part, don't have the ability to prosecute crimes on reservations from non-Native perpetrators, or even arrest them without backup from non-Native law enforcement. It's hard for many people, myself included, to understand how this is legal.
Yeah, I think it's hard for Natives to figure out how it's legal as well. As Mary Catherine said, after the Supreme Court's decision in Oliphant in 1978, tribal justice systems could no longer hold accountable criminally abusive non-Natives who were continuing to harm their Native partners, resulting in situations where non-Native defendants piled up repeated and multiple prior contacts with tribal police. So essentially, tribal police and courts weren't able to do very much to stop non-Native perpetrators, and then federal and state courts also just failed to protect Native victims. And that's where we are today, and the issues we're facing today, and how all of this mess has been created.
Mary Catherine, that's part of the crisis here, right? I mean, on the one hand, you don't have jurisdiction in this area, but then you have the state and the federal police and bodies that can intervene but don't.
Absolutely. In most cases on tribal lands, if a Native woman is murdered, the federal government does have jurisdiction. So we're looking at the federal government and saying, why aren't you doing your job? You took the jurisdiction away from us. So do something, step in. We have Native women like Olivia Lone Bear is a great example, because her brother for 9 months begged the FBI to search for his sister, begged. I mean, he was on national TV, he was sending letters, he was making phone calls, and they did nothing. And they had jurisdiction.
Mary Catherine, you've said placing paternalistic restrictions on tribal courts in the name of due process is nothing more than a disguise for prejudice. What do you mean by that?
Sure, because I think, you're right. A lot of folks will throw out this idea of, well, non-Indian defendants, their due process rights are not protected in tribal court. The problem with this straw man argument is that the folks who say that actually can't point to a single piece of evidence, shred of evidence, where a non-Indian's rights have been violated. And that's the irony of these arguments. I'm not saying tribal courts are perfect. If you look at state and federal courts, they're not perfect. And that's why I think it's based on prejudice, because for instance, in Oliphant, when the Supreme Court in 1978 took away tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians, one of the things that Chief Rehnquist at the time said is, there's just no way to think that a non-Indian is going to get a fair shake in tribal court. Well, wait a second. because that non-Indian is not a citizen of that tribe. That non-Indian can't vote in that tribe's elections. Well, I'm not a citizen of the state of Kansas, but if I walk into Kansas and start murdering people, I don't get to have a constitutional right to avoid a criminal prosecution because of due process. I'm sorry, that's not how it
and because
works.
you can't vote for Kansas
Exactly, because
governor.
I don't get to vote for Kansas's governor or pick who's on their Supreme Court. And one thing really quick about due process, there are due process protections in the Violence Against Women Act, right to counsel, right to notice, right to file a habeas in federal court, basically all the protections you would have in state court or federal court. And still the conversation, there are still people out there saying, well, we just don't think that due process rights are protected in tribal court, even though it's in the law and no one can point to a shred of evidence that it hasn't been provided. And so I really do think we're talking about prejudice.
Let's stay on this topic of the Violence Against Women Act. The renewal passed in the House of Representatives in 2019, Carrie, but it's languishing in the Senate. If passed, it would expand tribal jurisdiction to include other offenses like sexual assault, stalking, trafficking, and child abuse. What kind of difference would that make, again, on the ground, on a day-to-day level?
Yeah, I mean, it would make a huge difference. What we've heard from tribal leaders, judges, advocates since 2013, since certain tribes started exercising special jurisdiction under VAWA 2013, is that although it's been really successful in protecting tribal communities from perpetrators who commit dating violence or domestic violence, the narrowness of jurisdiction under VAWA 2013 is a continual source of frustration. And that's because it creates those loopholes for offenders, it leaves victims unprotected, and it limits how effectively tribes can prosecute domestic violence offenders for crimes that co-occur with domestic violence. So enhancing, these provisions and expanding tribal jurisdiction will help to better protect tribal communities, surrounding communities, and ultimately, hopefully, we would see a decline in the rates of abuse of Native women.
We know that there is a long history of institutional racism against Indigenous people in this country. The question that I want to get an answer from you two is sort of how we go about reversing that history. As a practical matter, what can we do, and how do you specifically go about doing that work? I'll start with you, Mary Catherine.
It's a huge question, and I think that there's invisibility, right? Most people, if they know of a Native woman, they know of a Halloween costume, and that's it. We're starting to change that. We've got our first Native woman member of the cabinet, the Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, right? We've got Native women in Congress. We have a lot of work to do in the curriculum in the United States. Most law schools don't teach Oliphant, right? So most law students who go to law schools don't study the Supreme Court decision that is the reason why our Native women face the highest rates of domestic violence, sexual assault, and homicide in the United States.
Mary Catherine's talked a lot about the kind of educational piece and a bit of the cultural piece. Carrie, what else can be done to undo this violence, this legacy of violence against Indigenous people?
Well, first, we need to adequately fund and provide resources to tribes. Tribes are consistently set up to fail by this chronic underfunding. So we need to ensure that tribes not only have the authority, which is what we talked about a little bit with VAWA, but also the resources to hold offenders accountable, to provide culturally centered services to their community, to improve data collection so we really know the extent of the problem and can help identify more victims across jurisdictional lines. And so the sooner we give Native people, and that's especially Native victims and families of victims, a seat at the table in decision making and ensure that they're part of these larger conversations, the sooner we can come up with solutions that are actually tailored specifically to the needs of Native nations.
Carrie and Mary Catherine, thank you both so much for joining me in this conversation. Really appreciate it. Everybody, that is our show. Up front, we'll be back next week.
It's 100% Black owned.
Always on time. And Black owned.
Professional. And Black owned. Great customer service. And Black owned.
What company y'all keep talking about?
Jumpin' Jack Tax. Visit Jumpin' Jack Tax today.
Hey, what's up, guys? It's Miss CC, 24 years old, owner of CNC Movie Film Studios, and I just wanted to show y'all our psych wall. We got the largest psych wall in Atlanta. You can film your next film here, music video. You can have a photo shoot here. You can bring your whole crew, and you can even fit 3 cars. We got Damani in the back working on the sidewalk. Come shoot with us here at CNC Movie Film Studios.
Do you know what time it is? It's Tab time. Hello there, I'm Miss Tab, and welcome to my garden. It's time to go on a special adventure. Now we go there using our imagination. Holy guacamole, Miss Tab. Well, hello there, Ivy. Each square, you can think of a memory about family. Yes! Today we are making some fruit race cars. That was amazing. Hello there, little orange seed. I'm Marmalade. It's nice to meet you, just like Marmalade. I used to be very small. All of your feelings are part of what makes you so special. Lovey thinks so too. Hello, friends of mine. Come on in, it's Tab time.
Hi, I'm Femi OK. You're watching the stream. In the United States, the cases of black women who go missing rarely make their headlines. So, our question today is not why does that happen? We all know why that happens, but what can be done about it? In recent years, communities, families have been involved with somebody who's been loved, who's gone missing or even murdered. They have rallied around to protect black women. Let me give you one example. It's an HBO documentary called Black and Missing.
The detective kept saying she ran away. And I'm like, she didn't run away. It was like a punch in the face.
When a black person is in distress, missing, it's not a big deal to law enforcement because they don't think we have much to lose.
This one always gets me just remembering when she was a little girl. You blame yourself because it's never done.
My sister went missing in 2009. On all the major news stations, nobody would talk to me.
Gwen Ifill coined the term missing white woman syndrome.
If you don't meet those criteria, blonde hair, blue eyes, your stories are not newsworthy.
Here's my niece. She's missing. Her story is just as compelling.
We have nothing for our missing people except black folks' spit and grit.
Helping us share this story with you, this issue with you on the stream. Alex, Aisha, Amara, thank you so much for being part of our program. Alex, please introduce yourself to our global audience. Tell them who you are, what you do.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Alexandria Noah. I'm the Director of Political Advocacy at Black Boston, a community organization, and a doctoral student at Suffolk University studying youth development.
It's good to have you. Aisha, I want you to introduce yourself to our stream audience, but also tell them your connection with this particular issue, black women going missing, not being reported enough.
My name is Aisha Miller, and September 11th, 1986, my mother was kidnapped and murdered, as well as my oldest sister, who was 18 years old at the time. And for 21 years, we didn't know what happened to them. And it wasn't until the cold case detectives worked that case in 2007, 2008, where they found him. He was already in prison for having done the same thing to another young lady just 2 months after they kidnapped him. He kidnapped and murdered my mother and sister. So now what I do is host a show that reflects and focuses on the effects of childhood trauma on adult behavior.
Aisha, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you being on today's show, bringing your personal experience and sharing it with us in our show. I'm going to bring in Amara. Amara, thanks for being on the stream. Again, please introduce yourself to our audience. Tell them who you are and what you do.
Hi, well, thank you for having me. My name is Amara Kofer, and I am the creator, host, and executive producer for Black Girl Gone, a true crime podcast.
Thank you so much. All right, so we have 3 guests who are able to answer your questions, really dig into this topic. It's a hard conversation to have, but If you're on YouTube right now, your comments, your questions, I welcome them. You can be part of the discussion. Alex, let's start. Alex, Amara, Aisha, let's start with giving our international audience an idea of what it is like when you see coverage of, if you see coverage of Black women who've gone missing, or maybe something tragic has happened to them. Just in a nutshell, Alex, can you help our international audience understand what it is like?
Yeah. What I can say, when a Black woman or girl is gone missing, there is not equitable coverage. And I think a lot of people understand white woman missing syndrome, which was coined by African American journalist Gwen Ifill back in 2004. And this was basically aligning with that same sentiment, is that when Black women and girls are missing, there is a lack of urgency. But when it's someone that is white, or in other words, or not in other words, but what people will say is conventionally attractive white women, that all of the image is important. And when people view that, oh, it's like this person is viewed soft. So it really goes back to the depictions of Black womanhood and Black girls, how society has trained our mind to think about Black women and girls. And I think that reflects on how our law enforcement treats Black girls. We've been trained to view them in a certain way. So there is not equitable coverage. And I think that's one of the reasons why, is because there's a lack of protection. We are seen as, we're not valuable to society.
I see you nodding, Amara. Articulate that, no, go ahead.
It's exactly correct. Is one of the reasons why I started my show. We all know that there is a lack of coverage of these stories, but there's a lack of concern. And, one of the excuses that, people often make is that when they elevate the stories of missing white women like Gabby Petito, one of the things that I heard over and over again was that she was so relatable, and that they could see themselves in her, and they could see their daughters in her, or their friends in her, and they don't see that when Black women are missing, and that's a problem. And it's the way in which their stories are covered. It's the way in which we don't get into their lives. We don't find out who they are. And so, how could someone connect to them if we don't know these women? So, that's why I wanted to do a show that focuses more on telling who these women were, so that you can eliminate the excuse of, well, I can't relate to that, or, we can all relate to each other, even if it's just that we are women, you know what I mean? Like, we all have different struggles, we all come from different places, but some of our struggles are the same, and we can relate to each other, in a way that makes these stories more real for people, and more, something that they care about. I think that's what makes the difference.
Gabby Petito was a young white woman who eventually was found to have been strangled. That story was on cable news almost every night. It was like a running tragic soap opera. Aisha, what do you want to add here?
My question is, do we hear about it? Do we actually hear about it? It comes on, but it's a blip in the news. It comes on maybe one news cycle, one or two. I know, at least from my family, maybe a week. That was about it. And until we started raising our voices and going to the police more often, we wrote to everybody, every news outlet, not just news outlets, television programs, major networks that were on at that time, and nobody paid attention. No one gave us any credibility. So what I know and understand is that nobody listens. Well, very few people listen. I won't say no one, but now I'm grateful that we have more opportunities to do that, such as the different platforms, such as Miss Black Girl Gone and my own, that we're able to bring a voice and bring the voices alive, and let them know that we are human, just like my mom. Even today, this is 35 years. This has taken me 35 years to even talk about, to the degree that it needs to be talked about for me, because it's so personal. It was so hurtful.
I can't.
So Aisha, I'm sorry. You sent us this picture. You sent us several pictures. One is you are the spitting image of your mum. Okay, so everyone, this is Aisha's mum. This is a little, I'm going to say baby girl, but you were about 9 at the time. This is you, Aisha, and you lost your mum and your sister in a tragic situation, and you had about a week's worth of attention from the media, and that was it. Why did they move on? Why didn't they stay with this story?
At that time, they wanted to accuse my father because generally in a domestic case, they want to pin it on a relative, somebody that they knew. So it went unnoticed. And because they couldn't connect him to it, they had no DNA. It wasn't that popular back in 1986, but they couldn't pin him. And so they couldn't conclude the matter for him. And so it just went cold. The case went cold. And unfortunately and regretfully, the Tommy Lee Stewart, who was the assailant, he did the same thing to another young lady just 2 months after that. She lived. And because she lived, she's the reason why we know what we know today. And it took that long. But even her, nobody paid attention to her case either.
Senator, just to kind of tag in, I'm sorry. I just wanted to kind of tag in with on Aisha's point about the, reaching out to media outlets and them just not caring. That is such a common thing I see in the stories that I tell of these families, particularly of the missing women, reaching out to the local media and them just kind of just like, this is really not that interesting of a story for us. And that is, it's sad because they, that's their first, the place they go is to their local media. And I think that there's also a difference between the local media covering it and the national media covering it. A lot of times the local media will pick up these stories, but it stays within the confines of the small town or the area or the city in which the crime took place, and it doesn't ever make it to the national stage. And that is the difference between, the cases of missing Black women on the regular and cases like the Gabby Petito case, is that they do often get elevated to that national level more often than Black women in these cases ever have. So.
Now, I will say that.
I think. I'm sorry.
Alex goes first, and then Aisha, you can go second. I'll do a little moderating here, but keep going, Alex. Go ahead.
No, this is a really exciting conversation, and I also want to talk about Black families, because I think Black families are forced to do the work that law enforcement is supposed to do. So in Boston, we had a case, Sherelle Pringle from Woburn, Massachusetts, and her remains were found by her family. And this goes back also to the documentary, Natalie and Derica Wilson. They also stated that, the first 24 hours of when a person goes missing is super critical. And in a lot of jurisdictions, you have to wait after 24 hours to file that person is missing. So there's a lot of the structure in law enforcement also hinders the development of making sure that Black women and Black girls are safe as well. But why is it that Black families are forced to do the work? And a lot of people are saying law enforcement is inadequate, and I would agree with them that it is inadequate.
Let me just bring in two young women who were found dead. They died on December the 12th, 2021. So here is Lauren Smith Fields, and this is Brenda Rawls on my laptop. And what happened to them really speaks to what you're talking about, the detective process, the police process. So with Lauren Smith Fields, her family was not told that she was found dead. They had to go to her apartment. Her landlord put a note on the door and said, if you're looking for Lauren, please call me. That is how they found out. And then with Brenda Rawls, again, her family were not told. It's almost as if the police were shrugging. So something, if we are really focusing on, we know what the problem is. We've known what the problem is for years. We are focusing on now, what do we do? It's not just the media, it's the police too. Aisha, you start.
It's both. Yeah. Yes, it is both. Because they want to come to a quick conclusion. They want to close the case out as quickly as possible. And whomever they can pin it on, and whomever they can get to confess or find some type of evidence to lead to that person's capture, they want to do that. And if they can't do it, then it's pushed to the back burner, right? Which was the case even with my dad. So, which he had nothing to do with it. And he kept saying that I didn't do it. I love my wife. So he was not involved. However, when the man who did it, Tommy Lee Stewart, was a serial offender, right? He'd done the same thing in the 1970s, came again in 1986, twice in 1986. And so, but nobody looked at him. Even when the young lady went to the police in November of 1986, nobody followed up again, right? So he did eventually go to prison for her case, but to link our two cases, it took 21 years to link our two cases. And so, unfortunately, my family found the body of my oldest sister in our home, and we didn't know what happened to my mom. We didn't know.
So I want to bring in the voice of Darnell B. Crosland. He's an attorney. I'm going to play this video, and then Amara, I want you to react off the back of this video, because Darnell is bringing some of these ideas about, now what do? We know that our Black women are not being taken seriously when they go missing or when they're murdered. He has some solutions. Here he is.
Now enjoy the same trust of Ashirvad with Ashirvad Swasti Pure Cow Ghee.
The death of Lawrence Smith Fields is an absolute tragedy, and what we're asking for isn't much. She was reported dead by a white man she met on Bumble. She's a 23-year-old, beautiful, vibrant, YouTube influencer, Instagram model, college student. And from the time of her death, the Bridgeport Police Department didn't even have the decency to notify the family. They did no investigation, they preserved no evidence. And as we sit here today, we don't have any answers as to how she died or how these drugs ended up in her system. That's unacceptable. So what we want, and what justice looks like for us, is if the Department of Justice comes into Bridgeport, Connecticut, and does a proper investigation. They deserve answers, and we want those answers now.
I mean, yeah, I think that, in a case like with Lawrence Smith Fields, it's very typical for the police to react this way when a woman of color, Black woman, goes missing. There is, Aisha's story about the process investigation of her mother's death, of her mother's murder, and the kidnapping of her sister, the Lawrence Smith Fields story. It's very familiar in the stories that I've told about how the police initially react. I think it's important to understand that even when these police reports or these missing persons reports are filed, police don't immediately start investigating. It's not like you call and say, hey, my loved one is missing, and then they start hitting the pavement and searching for your loved one. Sometimes even after the missing person report has been filed, it takes the police weeks to start investigating the crime. And usually that investigation only takes place if something else occurs that sparks their desire to, some type of sign of foul play or someone comes forward.
Or social media campaign. We were just showing some of the social media. It's like the people on social media made the police investigate a murder.
And that's why
a potential murder.
And
I should say. Let me correct myself. Yeah.
Sorry. And I think that's how true crime serves a purpose, because what it does is it creates the we as human beings, we are kind of voyeurs. We like to hear about other people's lives, and that's why social media is so, popular. So telling these stories then sparks an interest in these stories, and then it creates, a groundswell on social media. I was saying before the Gabby Petito story hit CNN and MSNBC and mainstream media, I was seeing it all over Twitter, all over Instagram, all over TikTok. And then I started seeing CNN picked up the story because, the media is very much interested in what we are interested in these days. Whatever is the trending topic, whatever is popular, they're then going to latch onto that. And then in turn, that puts pressure on the law enforcement and police, because there's no way you can have millions of people tweeting at you what's going on with this case and you just wringing your hand.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so we have to kind of, and actually, as much as it starts with the police and it starts with the media, it also starts with us as social media, consumers, as people on social media, as people who like true crime, or just human beings in general. We are the ones that drive these stories, and if we can care about Lawrence Smith Fields, Lawrence Smith Fields is one of those cases that has become more popular because of the social media.
Absolutely.
Way before I saw it on the news, I can't even tell you how many people have sent me tagged me about the story, sent me messages about the story way before I saw it on the news. So it really does start there, and it can start there. I think that is where the difference is going to be, not in the mainstream media, not at the police level. I think it really is going to start with us.
All right, ladies, before you continue,
that's why...
may I just bring in one person who's important, and then Alex, you pick up immediately off the bat.
Yeah.
I want to bring in Erica Marie Rivers. She's the founder of Our Black Girls. This is the community saying we need to take care of our own. And then Alex, you can respond right off the back of it. Here's Erica.
Launched Our Black Girls for many reasons. The main one being because these types of cases are often underrepresented in the media. But I also wanted to pay attention to this site being victim-based and just sharing the story about who these women and who these girls are or were, and keeping in mind that they have relatives and loved ones who still care about them and are still searching for their stories. In true crime, often it can be a bit of infotainment, entertainment, and we don't always take into consideration that there are still people that are left behind and picking up the pieces of tragedies. And I wanted to have a space that was not only sharing these cases, but very sensitive to that as well.
Yeah, the work that she is doing is so powerful. So she is literally a one-woman show, creating a database of quantitative measures, you know, putting in how many Black women and girls have gone missing, but also gathering articles, documents, police reports, that qualitative aspect as well, so that it's shaping those stories. And as a community organizer, that is so important that we take care of our own and that we figure out, sorry, I lost connection, and that we figure out different solutions so that we can, you know, also promote the development of our Black girls. I will say that it is with our communities, but we also need to hold our elected officials accountable as well. Like, we can't do it all by ourselves. Representative Ruth Richardson of Minnesota has launched the first task force ever in the United States for missing Black women and girls and murdered Black women and girls. And I think for me, being in Boston, one of the reasons, similar to what Amara was saying, was that social media is such a transformative space. I wrote an op-ed about the ongoing crisis of missing Black girls in Boston because of the social media and because Black women and girls were organizing digitally and saying, these are so many cases, how come we are not talking about it? So I'm a writer at heart, so I decided to use that as a way for a solution. But I will say, we need separate task force. We need more than one task force to do this, and we can't work in isolation. The Child Justice Unit, police headquarters departments, human trafficking department, we have to work together to figure out an approach.
Aisha, I'm bringing you back in here because as Erica was speaking, I could see the emotion on your face. I also want to share this page because this page on Our Black Girls is your family story here. Myrtle Ann Hudson, teen daughter murdered by serial killer. So many families do not know what happened to their loved ones. You know. What difference does that make to you?
It made a major difference. I just happened to be searching for Tommy Lee Stewart because every few years I do a search for him to make sure he's still in prison. And I just happened to be doing that, and I came across this story. For years there had been no coverage on my family story, on my mom and my mother's kidnapping. And I found Erica, and she and I instantly connected via Instagram. I wrote to her and I told her, hey, this is my family story. And it developed from there. And she and I have built a relationship where it's personal. It's personal to me. And I celebrate all the work that she's doing to bring light and bring a voice, a louder voice, to the victims and their families and how it impacts their families. She humanizes the women and the Black women who have gone missing or murdered. So I'm ever grateful for her.
I have a couple of quick, very YouTube questions. Our audience is watching you. They're empathizing. They were asking questions. Instant answers back because we're almost at the end of the show. So SA says, have you ever witnessed, guess, firsthand how much a greater impact that more news coverage, more police effort has had? Alex, I see you nodding your head very quickly. What have you seen?
Yes, there was a case. I'm not going to say the name of the person, but there was a case in our organization, Black Boston, where we had one of our members' friends were missing, and we blasted it, and we did the Boost Black Girls campaign, and that definitely helped law enforcement and helped our elected officials understand that this is very important.
All right, one more on YouTube. I hear you. I appreciate this. Another one on YouTube. Is the coverage because or the lack of coverage because of ratings that it's seen that white cute women get more ratings than black women? Amara, be honest, be frank.
Most definitely, yeah. They're with everything in America. That is what it is, and a lot of it is ratings. And black women, the news media outlets don't feel like their stories are going to bring, that awareness, or people are going to care, or that the story is interesting enough. And so, yeah, that has a lot to do with it.
But we are changing the status quo. Well, not we. Amara, Alex, Aisha are changing the status quo. All of the podcasts, the conversations, the websites are changing how black and missing women are being treated. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for your comments on YouTube. I'll see you next time.